Welcome back. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. The second hour underway. Joining me now is Ann Barnhardt, who is a CTA, commodity trading advisor, for the past 14 years. She specializes in cattle. If I recall all the money that Hillary Clinton made trading cattle futures way back when. Anyway, she has formerly ran Barnhart Capital Management, an independent IB, introducing broker. For the past 6 years, she's actually closed her firm down, shut down, out of business, as a result, not of necessarily the MF Global collapse, but because of what the government did, how the government reacted to this collapse, what it meant for MF Global customers, and her fears over what might happen in the future to her own customers. Ann, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Sure, thanks for coming on. So tell me from your perspective, I mean, what did you see? What happened at MF Global that was so different that what might have happened in the past if a commodity company had gotten into similar trouble? How was the reaction different, and why did it result in the decision that you made?
Well, it was the first time in history that any customer funds had quote-unquote gone missing, but let's not sugarcoat it, that the money was stolen. This was the first time in history that money had been stolen out of customer accounts. It was also the first time in history that clients were locked out of their accounts, not even permitted to liquidate positions while the markets continued to trade. And that dynamic, where those people were just sitting there powerless to even get out of their positions, went on for in excess of a week. Sitting here as
so you're telling me if the market was going against a particular customer they had a trade on, they had no ability to exit that trade to mitigate those losses?
That is absolutely correct, and I was in contact with other folks in the cattle industry who didn't necessarily do their hedge business through me, but were just contacts of mine who had positions on, who had hedges on. They had exited the cash market position and therefore needed to get out of their hedges in order to balance the books. Usually cash cattle trade late in the week, so the cash cattle had traded on Thursday or Friday. They come in early the next week. They want to get out of their hedges. They're short the market, and the cattle market is just going up, 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 and it goes up, 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 up for, I think the cattle market rallied $6 a hundred, which is a big move in cattle. In that week, those people couldn't get out of their hedges.
What about open orders? If some
was commit suicide, it was de facto suicide by the Merc to do that to those people.
Well, what about open orders? What if I had an open limit order to buy or a stop order to buy or sell? Were the open orders honored or were they canceled?
No, I believe they were all canceled. Every MF Global was shut down. I believe it was that Tuesday morning when the floor brokers showed up at the Board of Trade and the clerks showed up at the Board of Trade. They were escorted out. They weren't even allowed on the floor. The guys who got there early were actually physically escorted out by security. Everything was shut down. It was unprecedented and unfathomable.
So let's assume that you had a futures contracts on, and there's a lot of leverage, and the market is going against you. You had protective stops in there to limit your exposure. They don't honor your stops. The market moves against you. Your account could be completely wiped out. What about a debit? Are you responsible then for, let's say if somebody had $20,000 in their account, they had a couple of contracts on, and they ended up losing $50,000 because their stops weren't honored. Are they now obligated to meet those margin calls and send more money into an account they have no control over?
Absolutely. I visited with multiple cattlemen who weren't even on call by the time that they were actually allowed to trade their account after their accounts had been transferred to R.J. O'Brien a week later. They went from having equity in their account and not even being on call to having a debit balance in their account. The swings here, I mean, even small guys had mid-five-figure account balance swings like that and were in debit on day one with R.J. O'Brien. It was criminal.
What is the rationale? I can see a rationale to saying you can't withdraw funds from the account because we're not really sure how much money is there. But by what rationale could you say you can't close out open positions?
Dude, you tell me. Get Terry Duffy on here and pin that SOB down and say, what in the hell were you thinking? What were you thinking? And I want to steer this a little bit towards the information that is broken over the weekend, I would encourage people to visit my website, which is barnhart.biz, BARNHARDT.biz. I last night posted a declaration. I am now officially calling for a full general financial market strike after what has happened over the weekend. It was revealed over the weekend that the powers that be, the Merck and the bankruptcy trustee and all of these people who organized this bankruptcy fraudulently, illegally filed this bankruptcy as a bankruptcy, a Chapter 7 of a securities firm and not as a commodities brokerage. This bankruptcy of MF Global should have been filed under Subchapter 4 of the Chapter 7 Bankruptcy Code, which specifically covers commodity brokerage firms. Instead, they illegally, fraudulently filed this bankruptcy as the bankruptcy of a securities firm. Huge.
Well, let me ask you a question. What is the difference?
I have to explain this, sir. What that means is that in a securities firm bankruptcy, the debtors or the creditors of the company go to the front of the line and the customers go to the end of the line. In a commodity brokerage bankruptcy, the customers, needless to say, go to the front of the line. MF Global had less than 400 securities accounts, and I believe they had more than 40,000 futures accounts. So this was willfully set up to screw the customers and put specifically J.P. Morgan at the front of the line as a creditor to this firm. It's fraud, and everybody should withdraw all of their money from the financial markets until this fraud is corrected.
And now, are you talking about the future? Are you talking about a strike of commodities brokers, or you're talking about securities brokers in general?
Everything, all paper, futures, stocks, everything. We need to shut this entire system down right now because this lawlessness is going to lead absolutely nowhere except to a total systemic collapse and the confiscation of property of everybody out there. The other thing that they're doing is they are now confiscating the precious metal bullion that was owned outright by the MF Global customers, not tied up in a derivatives contract, but physical bullion that these people owned outright, had clear title to, had vault certificates to, with specific serial numbers designating which physical bars of gold and silver these people owned. The bankruptcy trustee is now confiscating those people's outright owned physical bullion and is now using it to feed the bankruptcy of MF Global. This would be like if you rented a storage facility, stored a car in a storage facility, the owner of the storage facility went bankrupt, and somebody came in and confiscated your car that you had, that you were storing on that property, that you were paying to store there.
Clearly they have no legal right to do that. What is the justification then? How are they justifying, taking gold that belongs to MF Global customers and using it to fund the operating expenses of the bankruptcy?
There is no rule of law anymore. We're living in a lawless society, and these oligarchs are doing absolutely anything. And they're saying, hey, if you can't do anything to stop us, then we have the legal obligation to do it.
Yeah.
We are no longer...
I agree with you. We are tearing up the rule book and throwing it out the window, and we have abrogated private property, the Constitution. We're going to discuss this when we get back, and a little bit more about your idea of a strike. I'm not really sure how we would actually accomplish that, or we might do more harm than good, but we'll be back. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. On the line with us is Ann Barnhardt, former head of Barnhart Capital Management, an IB which she has closed down in the wake of the MF Global scandal. And, Ann, a lot of people are going to look at this scandal and say, you see, we need more government regulation. We have to prevent all this from happening. And what you're showing is that, yes, there were crimes committed here. Customer funds were illegally misappropriated, commingled. But the government, in the way it is reacting, is doing more damage to customers than the crime itself. And, in fact, commingling customer funds is already violating the regulations that are on the books now. So clearly more regulations would have done nothing to mitigate this disaster. In fact, government has made it worse.
Well, it's not just that government has made it worse. Now with the points that I just outlined about the fraudulent bankruptcy filing, we now know that the CFTC, the SEC, and the judiciary that is overseeing this bankruptcy proceeding, they're all complicit in this fraudulent bankruptcy filing, which put MF Global as a securities firm instead of obviously as a commodity brokerage, thus protecting the customers. The government is complicit in this. You have to stop thinking that the government is somehow competent and on your side. I've been dealing with these financial regulators for 15 years. These people are either evil or incompetent. They're evil. They're either government cronies who are in it for the money and in it for themselves, or they are utterly incompetent. And here, well, get ready for the political incorrectness. Here it comes. A lot of them are affirmative action hires, either racial affirmative action or the hiring and elevating of women who are supremely unqualified, who have no idea what they're doing. Of course there's no oversight of any of this. Additionally, what John Corzine did was he stole the money. How can a regulatory body keep a nefarious evil man like John Corzine from stealing money? If these godless degenerates are going to steal money, they're going to do it. How can government oversight prevent that from happening until after the fact? They can't.
That's always my point, is that the regulations do nothing to stop criminals from stealing. What they do is they run up the cost of honest people who wouldn't steal anyway, and now they have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money complying with rules and regulations that do nothing to protect their customers. In fact, they hurt their customers because they run up the costs and degrade the quality of service, and they don't prevent any crimes at all.
Exactly. It's all window dressing.
Yep, and when you were running your commodity IB, about how much was it costing you every year to comply with all the rules and regulations so you can keep your shop open?
Oh my gosh, the cost of the Sarbanes-Oxley annual audit alone was killer. I was spending probably between 15 and 20% of my gross revenues just paying for that. And I want to make sure your listeners understand this. Don't get stars in your eyes that I'm some multi-billion-dollar hedge fund. I was a small commercial hedge broker handling pure hedging for livestock and grain producers, and I was a one-man IIB. I was the only associated person in my office, and it was.
What about the Patriot Act? How much? What about the Patriot Act and money laundering? How much did that cost you?
I was able to just kind of common sense my way through a lot of that when the auditors came and say, look, I know every single one of the people that are opening an account with me. If some guy from north central Kansas calls me and he wants to hedge one load of feeder cattle, which is his calf crop every year, and his name is Schiff, I know using common sense that this guy is not funneling money to the Palestinians. And I would lay into the auditors, and they would eventually back down. But the whole thing, it's absolutely ridiculous. You're absolutely right. The regulatory oversight in the financial industry is a joke, and now it's moved into the domain of being nefarious and evil, and that's why I've called for this general financial market strike.
And meanwhile, how important is it? You're dealing with these farmers. How important to the farming industry is the ability to hedge the price of your crops or your livestock?
Well, it's not impossible to get along without derivatives markets because, remember, the cattle futures didn't come into existence until 64, and there were no options on anything until 84. So it is possible to be self-hedged in the cash market. None of these guys know how to do that anymore. The other thing is I'm now starting to hear fallout in terms of things like grain elevators that have had hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen in the MF Global situation, who are now really getting into financial hard times. I had a call from a client the other day who told me that his grain elevator was borrowing money to meet payroll, and they were almost completely underwater because of this MF Global thing. And we're about 2 months in, so that makes sense. So what's going to happen when we have a bunch of grain elevators fail because of that? And more importantly, who is going to swoop in and buy these grain elevators that fail because they've had all of their money stolen by John Corzine?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, in your opinion, what should happen to John Corzine?
Do you really want to know? I think that if you steal $1 billion, that you have forfeited your life. I think that execution is on the table.
Well, all right. I wouldn't go that far, but he certainly should go to jail. We'll see.
Why not? Why, if we don't have justice in this country, how do you expect this country to survive?
Yeah,
if that is
I don't think.
Offense, what is?
I know, but I don't think stealing money should be a count. I don't think we should take someone's life for stealing property. But I think they should go to jail for a long time. But let me ask you, your call for a strike, what exactly does that entail? If people wanted to follow what you're saying, how would we have a strike? What would people do?
Close all of your securities accounts, bring all of your money home, and stop trading all markets, futures, stocks, everything. Man up, act like you've got a pair, and shut it down.
Well, that would put me out of business. I mean, if all my customers were to close down their
business anyway. When the markets collapse, you're going to go out of business anyway. When there's a civil war going on in this country, guess what? You're going to be out of business anyway. How about we nip this deal in the bud now with a nonviolent remedy instead of watching our entire civilization go down in flames?
Well,
how about we think more than 5 seconds in front of ourselves?
Well, what do you think would be? What do you think if everybody cashed out their securities accounts and converted it into U.S. dollars? What do you think would happen to the value of the U.S. dollar as the markets imploded?
What do you think is going to happen to the value of the U.S. dollar when Europe collapses and we start printing trillions of dollars at a time to bail out not just Europe, but then all of the banks that go under after Europe collapses?
I agree with you there, although we're
and then immediately convert that into physical commodities.
The U.S. government is in worse shape than Europe, so I agree there is a lot of problems, but I do think that people need to maintain their diversifications. I agree. It is concerning if the government can steal gold out of customers' accounts. Could they steal the securities out of my customers' accounts? Hey, I don't know. It is a cause for concern, but I wouldn't like to see a mass liquidation of all investments across the country as a reaction to what the government has done. I think we need to remedy this, though, at the ballot box and with the courts, because clearly what the government is doing is illegal, and I think it argues more that we need less regulation in the securities industries and in the commodities industries, not more. But anyway, hey, Ann, I appreciate what you're doing, and I feel for the problems you and your customers had as a result of the U.S. government. Anyway, everybody stick around. We got another half hour coming up on the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com.